In the cold dawn of February 1916, the German Fifth Army gathered with grim purpose. Their target was the ancient fortress city of Verdun, a symbol of French pride. German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, had devised a brutal strategy. He did not seek a breakthrough in the conventional sense. His aim was to bleed the French white, a battle of pure attrition. Falkenhayn knew the French would sacrifice everything to defend Verdun. He planned to turn the battlefield into a meat grinder. The opening bombardment was of an intensity previously unknown in warfare. Over 1 million shells were fired on the first day alone. The earth trembled and the sky turned a hellish orange. French trenches, carefully constructed over months, simply vanished. Soldiers were not just killed, they were vaporized, entombed. The French defenders were initially caught by complete surprise. German stormtroopers, employing new tactics, advanced rapidly. They wielded terrifying new weapons, including portable flamethrowers. The key stronghold of Fort Douaumont fell with barely a fight. Panic began to ripple through the French high command. It seemed as though Verdun, and perhaps France itself, was on the brink of collapse. Then, General Philippe Pétain was appointed to command the defense. He arrived to a scene of chaos and despair. Pétain's first actions were to restore order and morale. He famously declared, "Ils ne passeront pas," they shall not pass. This simple phrase became the rallying cry for the entire nation. Pétain's most crucial decision was the organization of supply. A single, narrow road was the only lifeline to the besieged city. It became known as La Voie Sacrée, the sacred way. Day and night, a constant stream of trucks moved along this artery. It brought fresh troops, ammunition, and food to the front. They carried the wounded and the weary away from the fighting. Pétain also instituted a system of troop rotation, the Noria. No French unit would be left in the furnace of Verdun for too long. This ensured a constant supply of relatively fresh men for the defense. The battle now devolved into a hellish, grinding stalemate. Fighting centered on tiny, meaningless patches of ground. Villages were wiped from the face of the earth, their names surviving only on military reports. The landscape became a lunar wasteland of shell craters and mud. Constant rain turned the churned-up soil into a quagmire. Soldiers drowned in shell holes, unable to escape the sucking mud. The trenches were nightmarish places of filth and death. Rats, grown fat on the dead, were a constant, hated presence. The smell of decay was inescapable, a permanent feature of the air. Unburied bodies lay in no man's land, a constant, grim reminder of the cost. The fighting for Fort Vaux was a particularly brutal episode. A small French garrison held out for days against overwhelming odds. They fought in pitch-black corridors, often in hand-to-hand combat. Their only water came from condensation dripping down the walls. The Germans eventually forced their surrender, but only out of respect for their bravery. The artillery was the true king of the battlefield. Shells rained down incessantly, day after day, week after week. The constant noise was deafening. Men suffered from shell shock, a condition not yet understood. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably, their minds shattered by the endless stress. The battle became a symbol of industrial warfare at its most horrific. Human beings were just another resource to be consumed by the war machine. In the summer, the Germans launched another major push. They used phosgene gas, a new and more deadly chemical agent. The gas was insidious, killing slowly and painfully. But still, the French lines held. The German offensive had lost its momentum. The Allied offensive on the Somme forced the Germans to divert troops and guns. The pressure on Verdun began to ease, ever so slightly. In the autumn, the French launched their own counteroffensives. Under the command of the aggressive General Robert Nivelle, they pushed back. They retook Fort Douaumont in a stunningly successful attack. Fort Vaux was also recaptured soon after. By December, the battle had finally ground to a halt. The front lines were almost exactly where they had been 10 months earlier. The great German plan to bleed France to death had failed. But the cost was beyond comprehension. Estimates placed the total casualties at over 700,000. The number of dead was around 300,000, split almost evenly between both sides. Verdun was not a victory in any meaningful sense of the word. It was a symbol of the senseless slaughter of the First World War. The battlefield remains a scarred and sacred place to this day. The Zone Rouge, or Red Zone, is still too dangerous to enter. Unexploded ordnance, chemical pollution, and human remains litter the soil. The battle left a deep and lasting scar on the French national psyche. It represented both the ultimate horror of war and the nation's will to endure. For the soldiers who fought there, it was simply the inferno. They were the survivors of a battle that consumed a generation. The ground itself seemed to be an enemy. Every shell that fell rearranged the terrain into new forms of terror. Communication lines were constantly being severed. Units became isolated, cut off from command and support. Junior officers and NCO were forced to take command. Initiative and survival became intertwined. The battle raged underground, as well as on the surface. Sappers from both sides dug tunnels to plant mines beneath enemy positions. It was a silent, nerve-wracking war of listening and waiting. Sudden, massive explosion could signal the end at any moment. The psychological pressure was immense. Even away from the front lines, there was no real safety. Long-range Big Bertha guns could shell rear areas with impunity. A meal, a letter from home, a moment of rest, all could be interrupted by sudden death. The sky was a source of constant threat. Reconnaissance planes circled endlessly, spotting for the artillery. Dogfights between rival aces became a deadly sideshow in the skies above. For the infantryman, the planes were just another harbinger of destruction. Landscape was stripped of all life. Even the birds had fled. The only sound was the endless roar of the guns and the screams of the dying. Water in shell holes was often contaminated and unkable. Thirst was a constant companion to hunger and fear. Acts of incredible bravery happened every day. They were rarely recorded or recognized. Survival itself was a form of victory. The battle created a strange, shared experience between French and German soldiers. They were enemies, but they were also fellow sufferers in the same hell. Informal truces would sometimes occur to collect the wounded. These moments of shared humanity were fleeting. The logic of the battle always reasserted itself. The dead were often buried where they fell, their graves marked by a simple cross, or just a helmet on a stick. The soil of Verdun is a vast, unmarked cemetery. Falkenhayn was eventually dismissed from his command. His strategy had failed to break the French army. Pétain, the savior of Verdun, became a national hero. His reputation, however, would be tarnished by later events in another war. The battle left both armies shattered. They would never fully recover their strength or their spirit. Verdun became a watchword for the horrors of modern war. It was a battle where courage and sacrifice meant nothing. The outcome was decided by artillery, logistics, and sheer endurance. The memory of Verdun is etched into the landscape of France. It is a quiet testament to a generation lost in the mud. The wind whispers through the trees of the rebuilt forests. It carries the faint echo of 1,000,000 shells. It speaks of the sacrifice of those who stood firm. And it reminds us of the promise: they shall not pass. Lot.